For those of you who do not know who I am, my name is Jaco van der Kerk. I am responsible for heading up the portfolio for teacher professional development in the e-learning space in our province. And what we've done this session is a session we've done in the past. It's typically aimed at those of at our facilitators to improve their skills, but we decided we might as well open it up, seeing as it's a virtual session, if anyone else is also interested. So if you are not part of the virtual facilitating group, you might be interested in joining it. So please sit back and enjoy the presentation. If you've got a question on how that works, you're welcome to ask that at the end of this presentation. But just to get a sense quickly, what I want to do is I just want to launch a quick poll here, to get a sense of who is joining us today in this session. So please respond to the poll. You'll either see it on your screen or you're going to see the chat. There are 4 options. Please give me a sense of who our audience is that we're working with today. Right, so we have a variety so far. Active e-learning facilitators, people just wanting to learn new skills. People have registered, haven't become active yet. Thanks, Melissa. You are an e-learning advisor, I understand. I apologize, I did not add that to our list. Right, there are 30 people in the session, only 10 have responded, so I'm going to give you another minute or 2 just to get your responses in. It's good to see we've got quite a variety in here. All right, so again, as I said, if you're not part of the facilitation group yet, I'm very excited that you're part of this session. You might have stumbled onto quite I suppose you could say one of our higher grade sessions. We are going to go quickly because there's a lot of tools we want to discuss. And remember, you are able to move back to the recording at a later stage should you want to review anything that we will be talking about today. So in this session, the first thing we want to do is we want to understand how to maximize screen real estate, but it's more of a case of why we want to maximize screen real estate and what we actually mean by that. Every tool is a different way of doing it, but I'll get to that in a second. Then we want to look at the different sharing modes that we can use. Because the platform we use is Teams, we're not going to look at other virtual facilitation tools. They all work differently, whether you're using Zoom or you might be using Google Meet or Hangout. There's a lot of different, they all kind of have the same basic principles surrounding it. We're just going to talk about the sharing modes. Then we want to talk about annotation tools, different annotation tools we can be using. And then lastly, we want to have a look at participation interaction tools. So a couple of things that you can use to get the participants a little bit more involved in the presentation that we have. So the first thing we want to talk about is maximizing screen real estate. And here, the most important thing for you to consider is just being more intentional about what the viewer is seeing. So in this instance, what you are seeing, if you have joined my session, you should be seeing a full screen. I'm not showing a bunch of extra tools around. If I float to the top, there will be a couple of things appearing, but there's an intention behind the sharing mode that I chose, because I want to make sure that there's as little noise as possible. At this point in time, the kind of noise, so to speak, that I have, I've got this noise in the annotation tool little thing that I've got there, that is a little bit distracting, but it's not too bad, and it's unavoidable if I want to use the annotation tool. And there's this little thing here at the bottom, which some of you might be curious about what that is. We'll get to that later. It's just another annotation tool. But the idea is it's an intentional thing to make sure that you use as much of the screen as possible to get your message across. Right. My face might be showing in yours. My camera has been activated. I haven't necessarily used the sharing mode. There is a sharing mode that Teams allows these days where you can kind of have yourself floating on top of your presentation. However, that causes a few annoying things when it comes to recording. So we tend not to do that. When you are activating your camera, obviously that's going to show up on the side. But the whole intention of the whole thing about this is there's an intentionality behind. I want to get the maximum part of what I want you to see is my presentation at the moment. And I need to think about how I do that. Remember, if you've got if you have the Teams interface set up, so I'll get to that. So if you have the Teams interface set up here, there's only a small portion of it that the person who's watching it, or there's a lot of noise happening around that presentation. So you've got the chat maybe open, you've got the people open, as we see the guest asking the question, Al Nortir, she's seeing a video of my face talking on the side. And we cannot expect all our attendees to understand that there are options where you can go into the more, or you can at least go into the view mode and have a focus mode, etc., etc. So that's one of the options. You can go to focus on content, and it'll just focus on that and it'll remove the camera. And if I turn off my camera, of course, then you won't see the video anymore. But we have to be aware of the fact that most of the people who are joining our sessions will not necessarily know that. Many of them might know that, but many of them won't. So there's already stuff happening around the presentation that we're saying. We don't want to show too much. So we have to use, for example, when I'm presenting something like I'm doing now, this is a presentation, I'm in presenter mode. I'm not in the slideshow view mode, which we'll get to in a second. When you are showing documents, you need to find a way and figure out how you can show them in full screen mode, that you actually, unless you are actively using the tools in that it doesn't show. We need to understand how we can zoom in and out, right? So can we zoom in and out in different ways in the tool that I'm using? The presentation that I've got now, font is quite clear and quite large, so it shouldn't be an issue if I'm zooming in and out. And then lastly, this little trick with virtual facilitation, you need to figure out a way to make your cursor bigger. It's not always the easiest thing. There's a trick that many people like to use. Just want to warn you about that now, where we go into our start menu and we go to cursor settings, and we go to this change mouse pointer size. Right? So you will probably have seen, or some of you might know about this option, and it's great. I can change my mouse to be enormously big on my end, and I can change the color as well. But you are probably only seeing it change in color right now. You probably have not seen it go any bigger. So this is great if you're going to be plugged into an HDMI cable onto a screen. Then people will see your cursor being bigger. But a virtual session, that trick only works for color of your cursor, which is already useful, very good, but you'll have to find different ways of doing that. Now, I think when we get to a later part, I'm going to talk about, okay, it was huge. Okay, well, I was sharing it in a different mode. So wonderful that it went huge. The reality is we need to be intentional about it. And it is something, I don't know, Melissa, it might have changed that it actually changed it to be huge. It would be good if it works. Right. So the reason why we say this, if I go to this next thing, maximizing my screen, if you look at that, so this is one of our presentations that we have. If I'm going to be presenting and talking about this that you see in front of you, that part is the content. If I don't maximize my screen, all of this is noise. Does this seem familiar to you? These tabs that you see here at the top, all those many tabs open. For me, and this is just the pet hate, I really get annoyed when I see that. I don't need to see your start menu here at the bottom when you are presenting something. I don't want to see the start menu. I'd prefer not to see that. So keep in mind that what's actually happening is all of that is wasted space. All of that is noise that confuses a participant. Now imagine for a second, that is what I'm sharing, And that is wrapped up in the Teams interface as well. Whatever it is that they're seeing, even though the text might be quite large, they're going to end up seeing something tiny, and they're not going to get the focus right. They're not going to get what we want. And what you're actually doing is more than 60% of the screen, if you don't go into presentation mode, is just wasted. Right now, this, of course, is what you're seeing there is Google Slides wrapped in Google Chrome, which would then be wrapped in Power and in Teams, which would then be wrapped in Windows. So it's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm showing that I don't actually want people to see. It's slightly better when you're using PowerPoint, but PowerPoint, you're going to waste 56% of the screen. So you win 4%. So it's not a real improvement. But I think that's a pretty, it should be a no-brainer that you should not be presenting content in the presenter view. But even when you're looking at something like a PDF, what you're seeing in front of you, you're still actually wasting around 50% of the screen space when you are presenting something like that. So we need to be mindful of how do we fix that problem. So as an example, again, as I said, I don't want to be presenting something like this. I don't want to. Can you immediately see the difference when I went from that screen, from a screen like this, if I just go back to full screen mode, from that into that? There's just a big difference in the kind of focus of people when we do that. So I don't want to go into detail about how do we do the different things, because I mean, if you're using something like Google Slides is a pretty cool trick to it. I'm not 100% sure if PowerPoint does it exactly the same, but you've got this option where you can always use this presenter view, and then what it does is it actually opens up a new tab, or it's in a tabbed view, and I can use F11 to make it full screen or not. And then I've got this present with remote. So that's a nifty little trick I can use, and I'll show you why when we get to the sharing modes, why that is a useful trick. But you have to find ways of making it full screen. Word, for example, so yeah, I've got Word. If I'm trying to instruct people on Word, and even if I'm using annotation tools to kind of do that thing, so there's a circle around that, I can kind of use these tools, but still, I don't want all of that happening on my screen at the moment. So we don't really want to have that big view. So you need to find ways of changing that by going into modes of zooming in, using control and your mouse wheel, closing your ribbon. For example, suddenly I've got a much more focused view of what I'm presenting. And there are tricks in every tool that you will be able to find, and it's not difficult to find those tricks. You can usually just go to view mode and it'll show you different ways of doing it. Focus mode brings me the greatest focus that I can for a Word document, as an example. PDFs have the same kind of trick to it, the reading mode or the viewing mode that you can use. So the key to this is not actually how to do it in our different tools, but the key to this is being intentional about doing it. That's really the main thing we want. So it's impossible for me to, in this session, go through every single tool. How do I maximize the tool? How do I do those things? It is very, very difficult to go through that process. So it's something that you will have to figure out, find ways of making things bigger, find ways of making it more, of removing the noise that they see in front of them, as opposed to adding to that noise. Because again, the problem with a virtual facilitation is, in this session, I have no idea whether or not everyone is paying attention. I must make it as easy as possible for my participants to pay attention to what it is that I'm doing by not creating too much distraction around it. Right. So again, we showed the PDF. So there's a number of different ways in how we can also try and make this easier. And there's the knowing our options with screen sharing is part of that intentional thing that we are doing, and quite often that we're not doing. So let's look at the different ways that you can share content via MS Teams with people. The first one, and this is still the one that kind of everyone uses all the time, is share the whole screen, right? Many of us do this. We share the whole screen. I'm doing it right now, but there's a reason why I'm doing it. There's an intention behind sharing the whole screen, because I have to show you some features of this tool, of these tools, that requires me to share the whole screen. Whenever I'm sharing the whole screen, obviously that allows me to use multiple apps. And when I'm using multiple apps, if you want to be able to move quickly and easily and seamlessly through things, you must make sure that you know how Alt-Tab works, right? So you must understand the whole Alt-Tab concept. You'll see in front of you. Melissa, can you just quickly confirm, can you see the Alt-Tab that I'm showing now?
Yeah, I can see all of your screens.
Yes, so you can see there's a whole bunch of Teams sessions open on my thing. So I can switch between these different tools quickly and easily should I want to, should I need to switch between these things. But you can also, there's another trick that you can use using your start menu in the tab button that does kind of the same thing. The idea behind that is, again, the seamless transition between different tools, opening up these tools and transitioning between them seamlessly. I don't want to spend too much time on sharing the whole screen because that's kind of, in a way, the easiest way of doing it. Well, not kind of, it is very much the easiest way of doing it, but it's also the least clean way of doing it. Because if I'm sharing my whole screen, what will invariably happen is you will invariably at some point want to check something in your Teams meeting, and then people will see this screen popping in, and then, oh, I just want to check in the chat. Okay, Melissa said it's huge. Okay, great. And then we go back. Now, again, it just doesn't add to the experience of the person who is attending the session. So if we're presenting to teachers who are easily rattled, that kind of quick moving to that different thing can be very alarming, can be kind of confusing. Why is this thing happening in front of me now? By now, people are kind of used to it as well. But again, we want to try and constantly improve on what it is that we're doing. So that sharing the whole screen, again, it's an easy option, but it's also the messiest option. If you're working on multiple screens, it works. Like I'm doing now. I've got two screens. I can drag my one thing across. You can kind of get away with a lot of things when you're doing that. But if you're only working on one device, if you've got one laptop, we really should try and avoid sharing the whole screen if possible. Then sharing a window. I'm going to talk about this and the value that you have when we share a window. Sharing a PowerPoint live. I'm not going to demo this, but I will talk about the value of this. And then lastly, sharing a tab, which I think is a very, very underutilized trick that we are really, really not getting into. Okay, so let's look at the sharing a window and why I would like to share a window. What's the value and the purpose of sharing a window? So what I see over here in front of you, this is now just a kind of demo Teams that I want to show you. And let me just quickly activate my annotation tool over here. Just give me a second. See, normally I would just do this behind the scenes that people don't see it, but because of the fact that I need to present multiple, that's a good moment to talk about that. Because I'm presenting multiple applications, right? So what you'll see at the bottom, there are all my Windows apps open at the moment. Again, I tried to clean it up as much as possible. I probably should have closed WhatsApp before I started the session, just forgot to do that. But here I've got Chrome open. Here I've got Teams open. Here I've got Edge open. I've got my viewboard open. And then lastly, I've got a Chrome guest mode open as well. So I have to, in this instance, share my screen because I'm using different windows. I'm using multiple applications that I want to show people to do. But that comes inherently with the fact that I can't kind of hide things that I'm doing in the background, like you're seeing at the moment. I don't want you to necessarily see me doing this, but because I'm doing it on one screen, I can't actually do this in the background and not have you see this. So, but now anyway, now that I have logged in, we can move on. and I want to show you what I mean by the different sharing modes. So if I'm sharing my window, right? So let's take this. Doesn't want to move now. Right. So if I go to the share mode over here and I want to share my window, I'm going to click on share, and I'm now using the web version of this. The web version allows for one very, very useful extra trick that the desktop version does not actually allow. We're slowly building up towards that. The desktop version has other advantages built into it. I must be honest, one of the key advantages that the desktop version had was the fact that you couldn't do PowerPoint live with the web version. But I noticed in preparing for this session, you can now do PowerPoint live with the web version as well. So, but let's get to the second mode. So the mode that many people know is the screen sharing mode. We want to talk about the second option, which is window sharing, and how we can really leverage the use of window sharing. So if I select window as an option, what window will do is it'll open up all the different windows that I have. These things here at the bottom that we have over there. And if I've got, like I have in this instance, all my windows, all my different things that I want to talk about open in one browser, and I'm deliberately using Edge today because we very often end up using Chrome, and then we don't realize that the exact same thing that you do in Edge, you could be doing, you're doing in Chrome, you could be doing Edge as well. Edge has a couple of other cool nifty features as well. But now I'm going to show you, if I then share this window that I have over here. So I'm sharing the window. The useful thing about this is now it'll at least cut out some of the elements of my my browsing experience. So I can now switch between my tabs. So there I've got a website open. There I've got a presentation open that's already in full screen mode. So I can just move through that presentation. Here you'll see I've got a PDF open. I just clicked and dragged it into Edge, and it opens it up quite nicely. It's even got annotation tools built into it, so I can scroll. I quite like the Edge built-in tools for PowerPoints, for PDFs. Very, very useful. And it's got a nice full screen mode that you can use. Here I've got a website open, so I can quickly switch between my website as well. And then I've got this one open that I opened just earlier. So it just allows for slightly smoother experience. And this is where slides is quite nice, because slides I can have in this full screen mode, and I can have it in a tab, and I've got all the different things that I'm also talking about. So I've got my website open, I've got all of these different tools that I'm using. But an even more useful little trick that you can do if you're doing it this way, because now ultimately I haven't really fixed one of the main problems that I had, and that is still having to at some point I've got all of these things open, but now I've got this one open. I've got my Teams open on the same window, so it doesn't really take away this annoying part of having to go back to that. So a very simple trick you could use. If I stop sharing, you can click and drag a tab out of a window. So now what I've done is I've effectively made sure that I put my Teams interface in one window. And then when I share over here, when I use the share option and I go to window, now when I share a window, I'm sharing this window that has the ePortal tab, the improved presentations tab, the PDF, and the website, and it does not include my Teams tab. So what is going to happen is I can do that. So let's just quickly do that. I'm sharing this window. So my participants will see this, while I can easily switch to my Teams, check out what's happening in the chat, see if anyone has said anything without them noticing me doing this. And then even on top of that, I could open up new tabs, get other things, go do a quick Google search or a quick YouTube search or whatever, find links, all while they are just seeing this on the screen. Now that to me is a very, very important trick to be able to do. To be able to leave, it's a way as any teacher who's used a data projector knows the freeze button, like it's an incredibly useful thing to be able to freeze your presentation and in the background go and do stuff and not have that show up to our teachers. So to our participants, or in the case of in the classroom, the learners. So I'm doing the same thing here. I'm freezing my presentation, and then I can open up this window that I have over here, check out things and do things, and it doesn't influence them at all. But an even cooler trick that you can do, and really, I think this is something we need to start moving towards, because this is really going to give off the most effective experience for specifically browser-based content. Now, if we're looking at the virtual facilitation that we do as in the eLearinng directorate, 90% of it is browser-based content, is browser-based tools, web-based tools that we are using. And the things that we're using are not browser-based are things we can pull in. I mean, you can still put your PowerPoint into you can still put a PowerPoint into a browser, into a tab as well. So you can still view it in the same way. You can still take a Word document, open it in the browser, and in that way, you're sharing a window, not your entire screen, allowing for more flexibility. But for me, this is probably one of the really cool things we can do. So let me just quickly reattach this tab. So I go back to the share option, and this is a trick that is only available in the browser, the web-based teams. It doesn't work on the desktop teams. Yes, so this is one of those things when it comes to virtual facilitation. For me, this is a no-brainer. It's a tool we need to use more often, and I definitely am not doing it as often as I should because I tend to use the desktop teams more than I use the browser-based teams for whatever reason. But this really is for me, something that adds great value to the experience of the participant. If I click on the share button and I go to screen window tab, you'll see the first option now, and I think it's because Microsoft kind of knows this. The first option we have now is the option of choosing a tab. So what happens when I choose to share a tab? So let's click on the ePortal tab as an example. So we're just going to deactivate. We don't want to share the audio as well, but let's just share that. You'll see that it has now drawn a red block around the content that is being shared, and it is literally only the content, which is exactly what we want to be able to do. Again, it depends on what the session is about. If you are presenting a session on the on Chrome fundamentals, you want to be able to access this stuff here at the top. If you're doing a session on Microsoft Online Fundamentals, you want to be able to talk about these things on the side. So then you can't use that. Then you want to use a window sharing mode or possibly even a screen sharing mode. But again, for a lot of what we do, we really just want to share whatever is happening on that screen. And what's great about this is anytime that I want to, I've got this little button here where I say View Tab Teams. It pops me back to Teams, but you'll see there's no red block around this because it is not being shared. This is not being shown to my participants. So I can easily go on and do things on here, talk about things on here, and then go back to this one, run a poll, add a link, share, check the chat, whatever I need to do in Teams without it interfering with the participant experience and the viewer experience. And what I think is even cooler about that is I can then go to another tab and then just click on this option, share this tab instead. Suddenly I switch to another tab, seamless experience for the participant, not what you guys are seeing now, of course, but seamless experience for the participant. And they, again, it's easier to maintain their focus if we're doing it this way. And the same way we can go on and we can share all of these different tabs in this way. I've just kind of added a little pin here so that everyone doesn't want to play along, and then share this tab instead, right? So here I get to switch between my content in an easy seamless way that people can still follow. I've got multiple tabs open. The multiple tabs are not confusing people. The different things I'm doing are not confusing people. I'm focusing on the content. It's not going to work for every session that you present. The same as sharing your screen doesn't work for every session you present. The same as sharing your as sharing your the window will not work. But it's about being intentional about what we are doing. The last mode, I think, it's not something that is particularly it's something that we will use all that often within the e-learning directory presentations because of the nature of the things we tend to present. But for virtual facilitation, where you're speaking purely off of a PowerPoint, the live PowerPoint is a phenomenally powerful tool. If you click on the share mode, and you'll see there's an option here for live PowerPoint sharing. At this point in time, it says there are no files available, because what I'm actually doing here, I'm presenting from my WCG Schools account, not from my Western Cape. This Teams instance that you're seeing in front of you, that's an Edge. This is the WCG Schools, just to show you that all of this functionality is within WCG Schools account as well. It's not a Western Cape trick, but what I can say is if I switch to what you see in front of you now, this is a guest mode. So I'm logged in on a guest browser using a non-Microsoft account. Now, if I look at the people logged into this session, if there's a in brackets next to your name saying guest, that means you are logged in with a non-Microsoft account, which does mean you will not be able to access all of the features that we're talking about right now. You all have WCG Schools accounts. All teachers in the Western Cape must have these WCG Schools accounts. So I highly advise that if you are not using them yet, that you get the access to them. That's the only place where you can get your payslip anyway, and that you use those accounts to join sessions and to present from those sessions, because you get extra added functionality that way. For instance, here, if I click on share, I've only got that little thing there. There's no PowerPoint Live. There's none of the other modes. It does allow me to use screen window tab, which are the key ones that we just spoke about. So even if you are logging in with a non-Microsoft account, you kind of can do everything that I've shown you up until now, but you are going to lose out on some things. Liesel, if you need to know where to get that account, you need to speak to your admin staff, usually the secretary, whoever has access to CMIS on your end. They can go in there, can log in, they can get the account details. You can just find out more. Just chat to your e-learning advisor. They will also be able to support you in where to get that. Everyone in the school is supposed to have one, including SGB staff. Right, so you'll see immediately I'm limited with a couple of things when I'm logging in with a guest account and not logging in with a Microsoft account. But remember, we're not talking about only the WCG Schools account. It can be any Microsoft account that you're using. So just to use Liesel as an example, Liesel's one says brackets external, which means that she's using a different Microsoft account, but still a Microsoft account. So she should still have access to all of those tools. So the main thing is you won't have access to all of the tools if you're using a guest account. Right. So back to our WCG Schools account. The PowerPoint Live that I'm not really going to demonstrate now, but it's something you can play around with. What PowerPoint Live does, it allows for two very useful features that you can, again, integrate and implement in different ways, depending on what you're doing in your sessions. One of them is clickable links. So if I were to start off with a PowerPoint Live with, let's say I have this as my screen and this is a PowerPoint Live, I could add a link over here that says, click here to sign the register. Now, we don't always do that because we usually, after this point, we need to break out into Chrome or Edge and show some kind of web-based tool. So it is a little bit tricky to use the PowerPoint Live, because then you have to stop sharing and then share the next thing, which isn't the end of the world. So it's not a bad thing to necessarily do that. But the PowerPoint Live gives you the clickable links, which is very, very useful. What PowerPoint Live also does is it gives the participants the ability to navigate through the presentation at their own rate, should they want to, and should you allow it. You as a facilitator can, again, allow that or not allow that. Useful to play around with. And if you want to play around with these different features, I highly recommend that you go and create a session, share that link, open up a guest mode window. So just simply, if I were to go here and I click there and I open up a guest mode window, just paste it in there, join the session, just kind of have a view of what these two how they react with each other, what happens. We have to be a little bit more experimental with that, experiencing the way that participants are viewing the content that we are presenting. Right. Are there any questions at this point? Let me just quickly take a breather and ask, are there questions? I know I can see there's nothing in the chat. I've noticed that, except for the ones that I've answered so long. Anything else? I'm going to run a quick poll. Thumbs up if you're still keeping up. Just let that go. Right. Yes, Mina, I see you have a question. Let me just quickly. Oh, wait. Was the hand just to indicate still keeping up? All right. Perfect. With all these many thumbs up, I really hope that when I join the sessions moving forward, we start seeing a little bit more of the correct ways of sharing our screens. At this point in time, I'm still seeing a lot of people just sharing their screen. I realize why, because sharing your screen is kind of the safest way. It's the safest bet. If I share my entire screen, then I know whatever I'm seeing on my screen, they'll see on their screen. I know that. I get that and I understand that. But we have to start removing that safety net, and we have to start being a bit more intentional about how we go about presenting these things and how we go about sharing these things. Right. One trick that I can share with you: F11 is your friend. It is the full, not quite universal, but it is a button that often makes things full screen or not full screen. And then Control plus, Control minus is often a way to zoom in, depending on the tool that you're using, or holding down the Control key and your mouse wheel. So those are small little tricks that kind of apply to a lot of different tools. But again, all tools are going to be different. What works for one does not necessarily work for the other. It's about being willing to spend those extra 5 to 10 minutes to figure out, how do I make this thing full screen? Where do I go? What do I do? Because once you figure it out, it's quick to do it the next time. Right. So now we want to look at annotation tools. And this is something that I feel we're not bringing in enough. Before I get started with annotation tools, I'm just going to pop open another little poll that I've got over here. Where is that poll now? I made this one before. Oh, there we go. Right, so there's another poll I want you to do. Annotation tools add value to a virtual session. I hope not everyone says 1 star, because then we kind of suppose skip this part of the. So let's see in general, what do people feel? 4.6. So no one's feeling it doesn't add value. They're not essential, I suppose. This is true. Right, we had 10 responses. Let's give people an opportunity to respond, to still add some responses. I realized I need to switch up here quickly. I don't think I will be able to. It's okay. Oh, wait, I do need to. Okay, so for the most part, I think you all, not all of you, but most of you mostly believe that it does add value to a virtual session, right? So here you'll see annotate.net is the one tool I want to talk about. I'm just quickly signing in. The reason why I need to sign in again is you sign into a browser. So I was signed into my Edge browser. Now I'm signing out of my Edge browser. Now I'm signing into my Chrome browser, which brings me to one of the important things about annotate.net is it works in both Edge and Chrome. And you don't have to have multiple versions of it. I'm just using my Google account for it. You can use your Microsoft account for it as well. So you can connect using this tool, annotate.net. It is a web-based annotation tool. It's not going to work on other things that are outside of a browser. So anything that's in Edge, anything that's in Chrome, I have not tried it in other browsers, but I imagine any browser that can take extensions should be able to have it added. So what annotate.net does is it allows me to write on this thing. So now I'm going to draw a circle around annotation tools, and I can say annotate.net is the first one, so I can use the highlight feature. Okay, well, just before I get to annotate.net, if you're using PowerPoint Live and PowerPoint, for example, these things are built-in annotation tools. So you can just use those. Once you go into presenter mode in PowerPoint, you go down to the bottom left, you'll see the toolbar floats up. There's a little pen icon. Click on that and you can do annotations inside of that. And you don't need any special additional tools to add those annotations, right? Annotate.net, what it does is it allows me to basically do annotations on a website. Now, if you're using something like slides, it does not work on PowerPoint, on the web-based PowerPoint. I've tried it. Unfortunately, it doesn't work on every site. It also does weird things on some sites. It doesn't always play along to what we want it to do. But again, it's a trial and error, and in many tools, it does work very well. What I'm using a paid-for version of annotate.net, and how it works, the free version of annotate.net gives you access to the black pen, and it gives you access to the yellow highlighter. And that's kind of it, which is not a bad start, because with a black pen, you can kind of point out many things. There are not a lot of websites that are 100% black that you won't be able to write with a black pen. But the paid-for version costs $9. I think it's $9 per year. So it's really not very expensive. And what it does is it's a Chrome extension. So you'll see over here at the top. Now I'm just going to use my other annotation tool, and I'll talk about this one in a second. It's a Chrome extension. So you'll see over here at the top, there is my annotate.net icon. I can't really make it bigger for you now, but that annotate.net icon basically allows me to click on this at any time, and it opens up this little toolbar, which allows me to write on things. Why it is useful and why I like it a lot is it is also sticky. So if I go to the next slide, let's just go back to the previous slide, you'll see that annotation disappears because it sticks to that screen, whatever you showed there. While you'll see whatever I did over here is not sticky. That is overlaid onto the screen. So if I'm using, and it won't show unless I use screen sharing, but I'll get to that in a second. Right, so let me just quickly clean this one out. Right, so the reason why we want to use annotation tools is simply because it allows us to, again, focus the attention of the participants. Something that I realized when I started doing presentations the first time around is I had a tendency of wanting to do this. So we've got annotation tools, and we like this one, the annotation PowerPoint, and we use the browser annotation with annotate.net, and we use the desktop annotation. So I moved my cursor around very quickly, and I still do that sometimes, because when we're doing it live in front of, when I'm looking at it on my screen, it's okay. But when it is presented virtually and it's kind of very cluttery and stop-starty, then it doesn't really highlight and focus a person's attention. It's the same as using a pointer, but that pointer is just delayed and it's actually after the voice, etc. So that's the value of being able to use an annotation tool. And I'm not using a pen. I'm not using anything fancy. I'm using a mouse. I've just kind of gotten used to doing this by now. And I'm not perfect in that. So there I can draw a line. It's not bad. It's not perfect. But it's kind of good enough. That's why I like to use the tick, because that's also quite easy to see what I'm doing. But it just allows me to focus a person's attention. So especially when I'm using, let's say I'm using a tool like quizzes as an example, right? Let me just quickly open up quizzes. I had it open on another window, but as you see, there's lots of windows open, trying to just keep up with what I'm doing. So if I'm over here and I'm looking at the quizzes interface, it's clean, because that's what all of our edtech companies are trying to do. They're trying to simplify it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of, again, focus your attention by hitting F11, full screen mode. Unfortunately, the start bar is now in the way because my start menu is there. I'm sharing my entire screen, not just the window or tab as I should be. and I use Control Plus to just zoom in on content. So that's nice. But now if I'm talking about things specifically, I can move my cursor. Remember, I've made my cursor bigger for you to see. I'm using an extension for that as well. I'll talk about that in a second. So I'm using an extension for that. But if I still want to kind of focus attention, so here I'm picking up on one of the issues. Now, I know Quizzes does this because it's got two different frames that it's used about the way the website is built. So I can write on this inside frame, but not on the outside frame, except if I actually go and write on the outside frame. So it just gives me that option of highlighting things. If people are struggling to follow my cursor, where's my cursor going? They will not struggle to see that block if I'm drawing a red block around the create button. They will not struggle to see the arrow if I'm drawing an arrow to say, there's the settings option, right? So, and it takes a while to get used to all of these tools. It takes a while to just kind of wrap your head around, especially switching between the pen mode and the pointer mode. But I really feel the same way that when we are writing on a whiteboard in a classroom, we use pens, we use whiteboard markers. And I see a lot of teachers presenting in a classroom with a PowerPoint and then grabbing a pen and writing on that thing on the presentation with a whiteboard marker. And this does all of that for you in the same way that you would be using a pen. Now, I can tell you, I've tried this before. This is an incredibly cool tool. If you're fortunate enough to have a smart board, or if you're fortunate to have a what are those things called again? The e-beam or the or anything similar to that. This works unbelievably well if you're doing something like that. But it just allows me to highlight and focus the attention onto certain things. So very, very, very useful tool. So if you want to, if you want to get it, annotate.net, you get a free a trial mode. I think it's 14 days or something like that. Trial mode to try it out. It actually has a lot of other amazing features in it that I have never had the opportunity to test out because I'm not actively teaching in a classroom especially with learners that have devices, but it's got a lot of cool other things that you can try out. And as I said, importantly, it works on both Chrome and on Edge. So it's not browser specific in what you're using. And just to show you as well, I'm pretty sure annotate.net will work well on their own website. So you'll see I can write on the thing, I can scroll, I can highlight things, and I can scroll, and it sticks to that part of the website if you're showing content on a website. And it's also pretty cool if you're showing a video, a YouTube video, for example, and you're playing that, you can actually pause it and write on that video and do things like that and highlight things. And you've got all sorts of other features in here as well, being able to add text. So I don't have to try and write with a mouse. I can just type it, right? And then I can just move that around. There we go. And now it doesn't want to move. So useful little tricks you can do with this using annotate.net. But what happens if I want to do annotation? So let's go back to this one. And I said, what happens when we want to do desktop annotation? So the minute I go to my desktop, I can't actually add annotation. So let me just go use something like, oh, there's my, wait, maybe we don't want to show all of that to you. So there's my desktop. See, it's nice and clean. There's not a lot of stuff on it. Now I want to be able to do things on my desktop. So I've got this nifty little app. And again, this is only scraping the surface of what it can do, but I find it worked quite nicely. It's kind of out of my way, called My View Board. Same principle. I've launched it. So let me just quickly close it first just to show you how it works. So let's just exit that. So what My View Board actually is it's a whiteboarding software tool. So if I launch My View Board, give it a second to launch. This only works on your primary screen. So you might, if you're like me, I'm using my laptop that's connected to an external monitor. I just went into my Windows settings and switched it for this session that the external monitor becomes my primary screen and not the desktop monitor. Oh, sorry, not the laptop monitor, because otherwise it's not going to work. Right. I'm not entirely sure why it is enormous. Oh, it's because I've changed my cursor in Windows to be enormous. So that's why it is enormous now. But this is actually a whiteboarding software tool. It's got lots of cool whiteboarding features in it. But the main thing I am really interested in is that little button over there, which I can click on, which basically turns it into a little tool that hovers around, and anything that I open up, it'll hover on top of it and I can write on it. Now, the disadvantage of this is it is not sticky. So what that means is if I write something, so yeah, I'm going to write something, just to show you that I have probably written too many things with a mouse by now. So they have written something. Obviously, if I've got a stylus, this will be very, very useful. But now if I'm going to switch to something else, so there's the pen mode that I've switched to. Now I click on the mouse mode. If I switch to something else, that something is just going to come along with everything that I am presenting. So that is one of the big drawbacks of this. However, it does allow me to write annotations on any the tool that I've opened up. But then I must use the screen sharing mode. So when I'm presenting content on how to use MS Teams, I can have this dragged in here. There you'll see, there's our team session that we have. And I can then go and say, there's Melissa. Thanks, Melissa, for adding a profile pic. The rest of you, where are all the profile pics? And this is actually now the desktop version of this. This is not a web version of this, because annotate.net, which is for many things a better tool because of the fact, simply because it's sticky, I can't actually use this now. But I can use all sorts of other features. Yeah, I can go and write things and it'll try and convert it to text for me. Lots of different kind of little tricks that you could potentially use this tool for. It's about exploring it. It's about seeing what it can do, what the functions are within this tool. But again, same as when we spoke about screen sharing, it's about the intentionality of the use. So the first thing we have to think about whenever we are going to present something, let me just get this out of the way and get back to our presentation. So the first thing we want to think about when we present something is the audience. What kind of sharing mode do I want to use? Then I need to think about the functionality within that sharing mode. Which tool would I be able to use for highlighting the content? Which annotation tool? Because we really want to start using annotation tools to lift out the focus of the participants, to add to it. And it's about experimenting and exploring and playing around with those tools. Right, before I go on to the last, probably the most complicated, but really one of the most important things we have to start, I think, getting better at. Are there questions on the annotation tools? Right, my view board. I want to just share the link to this with you quickly. So I'm just going to copy the link address there, paste it in the chat. Where is that going to take me there? Just quickly to see. I see it's not just it just takes me to the my view board. Right, so my view board, one thing I forgot to say, my view board is also free. Every function that I showed you now, it has a lot of other, when I tried it out last, I see now they've got a try now option. But my view board, everything that I showed you now is part of the free version. The other tools that are added to it, again, great, interesting functionalities that it can bring to the table that I've not explored for the purposes of this use. But it is a free tool. Other elements of it can be added. Interesting kind of audience interaction tools if you've got learners who have devices and they've got it installed, the client software, etc., etc. Then it gets a lot more complicated, but well worth exploring, I think. So there you can get my view board. This is, I just feel, of the various annotation tools I've played around with, and because I've played around with a lot of different ones, trying to find used ones that work for me, those two stand head and shoulders above the rest in terms of just pure easy functionality and cost effectiveness. There are obviously other tools that can do amazing things, but that can get quite expensive. Are there any questions around those? Are there any suggestions from the audience, things that you might have tried out that you feel, hey, this is actually a pretty useful tool? One thing that that works very well, but again, not everyone can access it, is if you've got the smart notebook software. That also has a great um, tool that you can use to write over things. Like I'm using this my view board. Again, it's not sticky. If you're using the eBeam, the eBeam software can do the same thing, but not quite. The eBeam software freezes the screen and then you can write on it, but then you have to unfreeze the screen before you want to go on. So I'm not wild about that functionality necessarily. Any questions? Nothing? I hope I'm not overwhelming you right now. I hope everyone is still okay. Should we launch another poll to see if everyone's still finding value in it? Right. So let's get on to the last part that we want to get better at: audience interaction. Now, audience interaction is a challenging thing if we're doing it virtually for a number of different reasons. But the primary one is a lot of the people who are attending our sessions are not necessarily so comfortable with doing these audience interaction things. One of the other things that's very problematic with audience interaction is oftentimes what happens is what we're doing takes the audience away from our presentation. So we'll share a link, they'll click on it, they'll go open up another tab, they'll do something, and they don't always understand how to alt tab, how to close that tab, moving around, different, navigating their own way. So audience interaction remains a challenging thing. So we have to be smart about how we do it, have to be intentional about how we do it. There are different tools that we can use, and people have different preferences when it comes to those different tools. One of the I think better and easier ways that we can do it these days is using polls and teams, which I've been doing throughout this session so far. So polls and teams is a very nice way for us to get audience interaction happening, because what the polls and teams does is it just pops up those little things from time to time that you're seeing. So how do we do the polls and teams? Well, the person setting up the session will have to activate polls and teams and add it to the session. It's not something that is added to this thing by default. So let's go back to our session over here. You'll see that I actually don't have polls and teams added to this session. So I can't actually use it right now. So what do I do now? Luckily, I am also joined on this session with my Western Cape account, with which I use to set it up. So the organizer of the event has to add this to it. So how do you add it to it then if you are the organizer of the event? Well, here you'll see there's an option that says apps. Let me just quickly make this a little bit bigger so everyone can see what I'm doing. Again, useful thing is I'm working in a browser-based tool, so I can go Control plus plus plus. It's nice and zoomed in. I hit the F11 button, and our focus is here. If you will just please ignore the start menu at the bottom, which I cannot take away. So over here, I'll click on the apps because polls is not added by default. Now, there's no way that oh, this is the other thing that I want to say. Even if actually, I'll show you that. So I'm going to add, here I use the polls option. So I'm going to add the polls. And the minute that I've added polls, it's going to ask me, do you want to add this to the session? Polls, yes, yes, yes. I want to save it. What's nice about polls is you can set up your things beforehand. So if whoever set up this, I'm going to get to that comment now. I like what you're saying, Ami. Very excited about that. So if I'm going to set up my polls, whoever's the organizer of the meeting has to first create this, has to add the app to this. Once they've added the app, then people who are facilitators in the session, they can create their own polls. So if you are joining a session that you need to facilitate, if you are obviously the person who's creating the session that you will facilitate, you can add these polls beforehand. You can set up these questions and you can have them, then you can kind of launch them as the session has gone along, like I've done so far. if you join this, if someone else sets up the session for you, you join it as a presenter 15 minutes beforehand, you can just go onto the polls and you can quickly go and create new polls. So I'll click on polls and you'll see what it actually does is it gives you a bunch of kind of drafts and examples, and some of them are quite useful and things that you can actually use immediately. It gives you this instant poll thing at the bottom as well, which is something I kind of like to do. So if I'll ask you a question, let me do it now. I'm going to say, give me a thumbs up if you, so now where's you'll see it on your screen. So on your screen, you should have this polls thing that's popping up. Do you find the value in adding polls? Do you think this adds some element of interactivity? Everyone just hit the thumbs up before I even said what the question was. So the instant poll is quite cool because you don't need to spend time setting it up. You can ask a question and you can just pop this up there. And you've got, as you'll see here, let me just quickly zoom out because we can't see all the options over here. Still can't. Why is it not showing me all the options? Okay, it doesn't want to play along here with the browser based. Oh, obviously it's hidden under the start menu. Oh wait, no, there we go. So it is actually only giving me those options. Normally the one that I use has more options. I don't know why this one is only showing me the 3 options, but I mean, they all come down to the same thing. A tick mark, yes, no, heart, broken heart. So they're all yes, no options effectively. So it's a nice way of asking a question, getting response. And we never get 100% response. I've got 14 responses out of the 39 people. One of the reasons why that is happening is based on the way in which you're joining. If you're joining with a Microsoft account, this will just pop up in your face and it's easy to click on the response. If you're not, it'll only appear in the chat. Right, so just show you quickly. So if I click on that option, for people using their Microsoft accounts, they will see that appear big front and center for them to have a look at. For people not using that, they will. Oh, no, this is getting tricky. They will actually only see it in the chat like that. Can you see? So they will only see this instant poll and they will have to respond in the chat. So you might need to prompt them, have a look at the chat, see if you see that, click on that and submit vote. But I think everyone will agree that the alternative that you see over here, where it was just popping up in the middle of the screen. Am I still in the right one now? It feels like I joined the. Right. Anyway, so that will obviously make it a little bit more. Oh yes, wait. Right. So that will obviously. It's just a lot more effective if it pops up open there in the middle of your screen. So very useful to kind of get that instant response going. And you can set up a lot of different polls in this way. If I click on polls and I go into this and I say new poll, it gives me these options. I've got 5 options. I've got a multiple choice. I can even ask a quiz question, word cloud, rating, ranking, just to get some kind of interaction from our audience. And it's a good idea to try and add a number of these. It allows you to respond to what they are saying. So that's polls. Explore it, have a look at what it can do. I haven't personally added this forms option yet, so I don't want to do it now live, but I know that Microsoft Forms, and the reason why I added it as an option, it's something that I still definitely want to explore in more detail. Yeah, I'll get to Mentimeter now, but what Microsoft Forms can now do is effectively what a lot of people know Mentimeter for doing. And it's the ability to get that audience reaction and show it live on screen. So it's a very, very powerful way of getting responses. So just to show you how that works, we're going to just create a form here quickly. And there are other sessions on Microsoft Forms that'll go into a lot more detail when it comes to that. But I hope it doesn't ask me to log in now. I think my computer is a little bit confused between the two. So when I create a new form, you have this option of presenting a form. So the minute I do that, you might notice that if you've used anything like a Mentimeter or similar, this is this looks like that looks. Like I've got no questions yet. So let's just go to the forms. Oh, wait, no. Sorry. So I'm just going to say example audience response. I'm going to add new. We're going to say, I don't know why that is the recommended question. Type of pet. This is a weird example. So AI sometimes does strange things. We want to, no, we don't want any of those. We're going to add a choice question. Does this look like a useful tool? So we'll add all options, yes, no, maybe. And then we will use the present mode of this. So the audience is going to be asked to sign in that instance. Because, sorry, I'm going through this a little bit quickly, but the audience is going to get something similar to this because I just haven't set up the form to allow anyone to respond. But you'll see that you can get great responses in this way from forms. I haven't explored it to the extent that it can go, but again, your WCG Schools account gives you access to forms to go and explore it. If you've attended the sessions, and I know there's been a couple of sessions on how to use Microsoft Forms, you should have a better understanding of how to use forms, and then you'd be able to use the content there to create this kind of audience response. Now, a problem again with this is that we are going to, just want to get something sorted here quickly. Let me just say, no, that's going to take too long. Right. It gives us the ability to get response from our audience in a different way, in a visual way that actually adds a lot of value as well. So does this look like a useful tool? Yes, no, maybe. Maybe we should just quickly, when you say collect responses, anyone can respond. And we want to say present. That should sort out the problem. Apologies for this. Right, so there's my link. I'm going to paste this link in the chat quickly, and then you can respond to this link. On the question, why do you have two polls at the top? I see you asked the question. I think generally speaking, I might have accidentally added polls twice to this session. I'm not really sure. I don't know if anyone else has seen that happen. Let me just kind of respond here and show you what this is going to look like. The live response. So there you'll see there's a live response that you can show people when you're doing this, and you can do it per question. So this is only the one question. So it's kind of like a, yes, Melissa, so I like polls a lot. So it's kind of like a different way of getting your audience interaction happening here. The one thing that I really like about it, if you haven't used Mentimeter before, Mentimeter does the same thing. But what I think is really valuable about Microsoft Forms is it does what Mentimeter does without the limitations, because Mentimeter limits you to asking 3 types of questions. So you can typically set up this type of poll. You've got that QR code. People can scan that QR code, and then you can ask multiple questions during the session. And as you can see, someone literally just answered a question, and it changed the way that the whole thing looked. So I think it's a very useful way of getting audience interaction, and a different way that we've been using. I really like the couple of features that they've built into Microsoft Forms now. and that is one of those features that's quite useful. Jamboard is another one we're going to use in a second or two, that we can get feedback. Again, there's great other tools here as well. Another tool that I really, really enjoy that's similar to Jamboard, just a lot more complicated, but way, way, way more powerful, is a tool called Miro, where we can get audience responses. The problem with these tools, like Jamboard or Miro, is there's a kind of learning curve for participants when they use it. Microsoft Forms, not so much. Polls and Teams, really, it's the one that pops into your face the easiest. Doesn't look the best, but it pops up. But again, it depends a lot on the kind of people that are, or the way that people are joining, the accounts they're using. I think Microsoft Forms has the potential to be something we could be using a lot more going forward, when we're doing audience interaction with the new tools that they've brought in. Jamboard, which we'll do now in a second, you'll see one of the problems with Jamboard, again, it requires the audience to develop the skills necessary to respond. Now, if you're doing it in a classroom environment, like we often talk about digital tools, once kids have wrapped their heads around it, once people understand the tool, it becomes incredibly useful and valuable. Another one that I think is a great tool to use, Slido. I haven't included in this session for the simple reason that Slido doesn't like you to break out. It doesn't do it well. So what Slido does, if you haven't used it, I'm adding these as exploratory options for you to look at. And I'm not going into detail into these. But what Slido does is Slido, in the past, I've used this a lot more. Last time we did this session, for example, I used Slido. But what Slido does is it inserts the same kind of polls that you can use in these things, but it actually just adds it. Maybe we should just use yellow here. But what it does is it adds it into your presentation. So it will actually go and insert slides, separate slides for that interaction between your presentation, your slides. It's great because that means you never have to break out of your presentation. So you can just stay in your presentation. So the application of this in a classroom environment is wonderful because you can put up a presentation, it can get to a question, and kids just grab their mobile device and they answer the question, and you get that response from the learners. Slido, unfortunately, is a little bit more expensive because you've got limitations. Mentimeter, you've got limitations because of the expenses there. So what I kind of like about what we have in polls is you're not limited because the tool doesn't limit you. It's a free tool. Forms, same story. Jamboard, same story. They don't limit you, but then the others have cool features that you can look at. What I want us to do now is we are going to use an audience interaction tool, and that is suggest what other audience tools you can suggest and use. And even if you can't add anything, you're welcome to add some kind of feedback into this. I want you to explore what you can do with that tool. I've pasted the link in the chat as well. If you aren't going to scan it with your QR code scanner, we also have to get to the point where when it's not safe to assume, but a lot of people are more familiar with QR codes these days. And I think the value of this is we can get them to do something on their mobile device and not break out from their hopefully laptop or desktop, which they're viewing the facilitation from. Because the facilitation, while it can work on a mobile device, not ideal. Right, so let's see what responses we get on our Jamboard. So what I want you to do on this Jamboard, if you've never worked with a Jamboard before, let me just show you, because you will have to do this kind of thing. So yeah, I can see a bunch of people are joining my Jamboard here at the top. So there's a list of people who've joined it. Then over here, we've got different little tools that we can use. Please add a sticky note. So there's the sticky note option. So click on the sticky note, and then you add, for example, probably one of my favorite new tools. I absolutely love this tool, Miro. well, I called it other cool presentation tools. You can add any tools that you've used in presentations that added value to what you are doing and how you are presenting it. So while you are doing that, I'm just going to go back to Ami's message that she had. Class point. I don't know class point. There's a bit.ly now. What is the bit.ly? Whoever added the bit.ly, can you explain to us what that is? And I like that. I start my lesson with a Google form check-in. Always a never discard the good, the oldies but still goodies, using tools like Google, like a Google form, just to get some feedback from the audience when they join a session. Always useful. My viewboard. So just to point this out, Ami mentioned this, that she uses my viewboard every day in her class for showing worksheets and explaining on it, using it on videos I've made for enrichment, etc. My grade 2s think I'm awesome. Well, Ami, I'm sure it's not only the grade 2s that think that. So it is survey nuts. Survey nuts, cool. Look, there's other cool stuff. Answer Garden was one of those ones that a lot of people used in the past. Poll Everywhere, PowerPoint interactive software, download and incorporate into your PowerPoints. Right. I'm going to have to look into that. Maybe we should, Liesel, just raise your hand quickly so I can find you in the audience and you can explain to us what that is. And then survey nuts, what that is, please explain that to us as well. Right, there you go, Liesel. I'm just going to allow your mic quickly. So please unmute yourself and share with us what is ClassPoint.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so ClassPoint is a phenomenal tool. You download it. It is Microsoft endorsed, so it's safe and it's not some kind of scam or a virus. You download it into your PowerPoint and then it will appear as a tab on your editing tool, your ribbon. Then you can create interactive real-time quizzes, like a word cloud, short answer, multiple choice. Then the kids joins it with this QR code on their devices in the class. They don't need any kind of app. It's web-based, and the children answer the questions right from your PowerPoint onto your screen, and the answers are projected off of your screen. There's little cute music playing. There's animations running up and down your screen. So it's a lot of fun, especially for the smaller kids. They can draw, they can upload images, and that's just the free version. So there's a lot of options just for the free version. For the paid version, you get fill in the blanks. They can record an audio and they can record a video as well. So I quite like it. I've been using it up and down on my PowerPoints in my classes, and it's with great success.
Awesome. So I think ultimately it sounds very similar to Slido, which again, Slido is works both within the Google environment and the Microsoft environment. Although I'll be honest, I can't use it in the Microsoft environment because of our restrictions on our accounts. But again, those things, sometimes they've got limitations, but if they work, they are incredibly cool. Viewboard, my viewboard that I showed you has incredibly cool tools. But again, I'm happy that you shared that because I'm definitely going to check it out. And I think that to me is what I really want to kind of leave you with, because we're pretty much at the end of the presentation. The only way to get to grips with these things is to explore the options that you have and to find what you are comfortable with, and to find things that we have to be mindful of our facilitator, of the people that are attending our sessions, what they will be comfortable with. But we also want to have options like these added to it. The more we do it, the more people will start responding, the more people will start seeing it as options that they can incorporate. And a lot of what I showed you today in terms of how we improve our virtual facilitation sessions, it's just about taking the extra 5 to 10 minutes, maybe sometimes it's a half an hour, to think about how this will be seen by people who are joining my session. And it's the same thing that happens in the classroom. What Liesl is talking about now is how will learners interact with this thing and how will they see it? How will they change from just raising their hands or just doing that and add a different element to what it is that we're doing? So it's about that intentionality and not just about kind of going on and doing it the same way that we've done it all the time. So in conclusion, if I jump back to my right, so in conclusion, there's the ID key and the registration thing again. In conclusion, the first thing we have to be doing is we need to be more mindful about maximizing whatever people are seeing on the screen, making it as full screen as possible, zooming in when we need to, zooming out when we need to, making sure that we clear the clutter and clear the noise and focus in on what it is that we want to talk about. So one way to do that is to obviously use the functions that are built into the software. So full screen reading mode, zooming in, zooming out, all those things, those functionalities are important to use. That's the first thing we can do. The second thing we can do is being more intentional with the way we are sharing our screen. Thinking about, can I avoid the way that I'm presenting now? Obviously, I couldn't. I have to share my screen because I need to show you multiple apps. But for the majority of the things that we present within the e-learning directorate and the majority of things that I've seen being presented virtually, whether it was tutoring lessons, whether it's lessons that are being broadcast from a curriculum advisor to teachers, all of those things, the majority of them, if you think about it, you could have made all of that content, built it into a single window, which would have already improved the experience of the people perceiving it. And I really think the ultimate prize for us is to start looking at the tab sharing function, because a lot of what we are doing can be the message that we want to bring across can be done just purely by showing the tab. And that takes away a lot of the clutter. It takes away a lot of the noise. You don't have to show that you've got 100,000 tabs open. People don't need to see that. They can only see the nicely organized thing in front of them. And then, so that's the first step, clearing the clutter, getting the focus. And then we want to bring in annotation tools to heighten that focus, to be able to zoom in on specific things. And again, I haven't shown you the only options available. I've shown you two options that I think work well, that are not expensive and that work well for what you're doing. So really zoning in on that, on maintaining that focus. There's a reason why teachers use whiteboard markers in a classroom, because it works. It adds value to whatever it is that you're doing. And then lastly, this is the most challenging thing that we want to do. We want to become more intentional about how do we collect responses from the audience using tools. Now, these are not always going to be, actually, for the most part, we cannot build that into the standardized content that we give from e-learning side. And when you're copying someone else's presentation, if I'm using Slido as an example, it's not going to work because you won't be able to log in with my account. If I'm using Mentimeter, you won't be able to log in with my account. If I'm using a Microsoft form, you'll need my account. So whatever tool that we are going to use to add audience interaction, it's something that you will have to do on your own to add to it. So those are the 4 steps that I think are critical to improving what we are doing for our virtual facilitation. Making sure that we think about how do we maximize the viewing? What kind of screen sharing are we going to be using to make it most effective? What kind of annotation tools can we use to improve the audience focus? And then lastly, how do we add audience interactivity tools to again heighten the experience? All of this is about trying to bring a more real world feel to a virtual facilitation, which we know is not always is an ambitious thing, but the bottom line is we have to always keep on trying to improve, because if we keep on trying to improve, we will improve in some way. You might not hit all 4 of this the first time you do virtual facilitation again, but slowly but surely we can grow in this. And it's always good to find a buddy that you can kind of play around with these tools with and test. And what do you see? What do I see? What do you see? What do I see? Experimenting with these things. Right. With that said, we have 5 minutes left. I managed to finish in time, which is very much a rarity for me. Are there any questions before we sign off?